The morning of September 1925 found the War Department building in Washington, D.C., bristling with quiet efficiency. Military officers moved through marble corridors, their polished shoes echoing against floors that had witnessed generations of strategic decisions. Inside Conference Room 214, a leather-bound document sat waiting for distribution, 282 pages of official doctrine that would seal the fate of black aviation aspirations for the next 15 years. The study carried a clinical title designed to mask its damaging conclusions: the use of Negro manpower in war. Behind the sterile language and rows of statistics lay a verdict that would reverberate through military institutions for decades. The report's authors, West Point graduates and career officers, presented their findings with the detached precision of scientific analysis. Yet beneath the academic veneer lay something far more troubling: institutional prejudice, dressed up as objective military assessment. Colonel Harrison Webb, the study's principal architect, had invested 18 months compiling what he considered irrefutable evidence. Intelligence test scores, psychological profiles, and combat records from the previous war all pointed toward the same conclusion: Black Americans simply lacked the mental capacity and reflexive decision-making abilities essential for modern aerial combat. Fighter pilots needed to make split-second judgments at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, while enduring forces that multiplied their body weight 4 times over. Such extraordinary demands, Webb argued, required cognitive abilities that the Negro population simply did not possess. The report transformed racial prejudice into something that appeared scientific and objective. References to cranial measurements and psychological differentials granted comfortable distance from the human cost of these assertions. Charts and graphs illustrated supposed performance gaps as if they were natural law rather than institutional bias. Military leadership absorbed these conclusions with visible relief. General Benjamin Foulot, chief of the Air Corps, had long harbored doubts about integration efforts. The study provided exactly what he needed: scientific justification for policies he already favored. The 282-page document disappeared into filing cabinets throughout the War Department, becoming the foundation for decisions that would stretch across the next decade and a half. Whenever civil rights organizations lobbied for black pilot training programs, officials simply pointed to the 1925 study as definitive proof. Such efforts would squander taxpayer money while potentially compromising military safety, they insisted. The report's conclusions hardened into gospel, repeated so frequently that they acquired the weight of natural law. 15 years passed while the world transformed around these frozen assumptions. Aviation technology exploded forward. Aircraft evolved from fragile biplanes into sophisticated machines capable of speeds approaching 400 miles per hour. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk featured engines producing 1,050 horsepower and service ceilings near 30,000 feet, demanding pilot skills that supposedly exceeded what black Americans could possibly achieve. Yet military attitudes toward black combat capabilities remained locked in 1925 thinking. The international landscape shifted dangerously. Hitler's Luftwaffe demonstrated devastating air power during the Spanish Civil War. Japanese naval aviation proved its lethal capabilities across the Pacific. American military planners watched these developments with mounting dread, recognizing that future wars would be won or lost in the skies above traditional battlefields. Nazi Germany had conquered most of Western Europe through campaigns built on coordinated air superiority. Stuka's dive bombers cleared paths for panzer divisions, while Messerschmitt fighters swept enemy aircraft from contested skies. The Battle of Britain proved definitively that air supremacy determined a nation's survival in modern conflict. American military leadership suddenly faced a brutal reality. They needed thousands of trained pilots, and they needed them fast. Political pressure began building simultaneously. The Pittsburgh Courier launched its Double Vi campaign. Victory against fascism abroad required confronting racism at home. Civil rights leaders like Walter White pressed President Roosevelt directly, pointing out the contradiction of fighting for democracy while denying basic rights to millions of American citizens. Eleanor Roosevelt became an unexpected champion, visiting Tuskegee Institute in Alabama and demonstrating interest in its civilian aviation programs. The historically black college had been quietly cultivating aviation expertise, training civilian pilots who showed remarkable ability despite facing institutional obstacles at every turn. When the First Lady took a demonstration flight with pilot Charles Anderson, newspapers across the country carried photographs that challenged everything the military establishment claimed about black aviation capabilities. The world shifted again on December 7, 1941. Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, and within hours American military planners grasped an undeniable truth. They faced a two-front global conflict requiring mobilization of every available resource. The luxury of racial discrimination had suddenly become an unaffordable waste of human potential. War Department officials found themselves trapped between doctrine established in 1925 and manpower necessities created by global catastrophe. The compromise that emerged satisfied no one. The 99th Fighter Squadron would train at Tuskegee Institute under carefully controlled conditions, allowing military brass to assess black combat capabilities without disrupting existing operational units. If the experiment failed, as nearly everyone expected, it would provide final proof that the 1925 assessment had been correct all along. Colonel William Momier, selected to oversee the program's eventual combat deployment, left no doubt about his expectations. Negro pilots lacked the technical ability and coordination required for fighter operations, he declared bluntly. The Tuskegee Experiment would simply demonstrate these limitations under controlled combat conditions. Military orthodoxy remained confident that this carefully managed failure would finally vindicate racial assumptions that had guided policy for nearly 2 decades. The Mediterranean blazed with summer heat as Lieutenant Charles Hall adjusted his oxygen mask at 18,000 feet, scanning the crystalline sky above Pantelleria. Below, Allied warships pounded the Italian fortress island with artillery fire that sent towering plumes of smoke and debris skyward, preparing invasion zones for assault forces scheduled to land within hours. June 2, 1943 marked the 99th Fighter Squadron's first genuine test against Luftwaffe opposition. Hall's Curtiss P-40 Warhawk trembled slightly in the thin atmosphere. Its Allison V-1710 engine produced 1,050 horsepower that suddenly felt inadequate against the imminence of real combat. Fresh invasion stripes, black and white bands, covered the aircraft's olive-drab fuselage, hastily applied to prevent friendly fire disasters during the chaos of amphibious assault. Radio transmissions crackled through his headphones as bomber formations approached their targets, escorted by fighter pilots carrying the invisible weight of institutional skepticism. The morning briefing had seemed routine. Escort 12 North American B-25 Mitchell bombers during their strike against German positions defending Pantelleria's harbor. Intelligence suggested minimal Luftwaffe activity, making this an ideal opportunity for combat green pilots to adjust to real conditions after months of intensive training in North Africa. What remained unspoken was the crushing pressure accompanying every maneuver, every transmission, every tactical decision that commanders, already convinced of inevitable failure, would scrutinize. Hall spotted them first. 2 dark silhouettes diving from the sun at tremendous velocity, their shapes unmistakably German as they closed on the bomber formation at over 450 miles per hour. Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, each mounting BMW 801 radial engines producing 1,700 horsepower, substantially outperforming the American P-40s in speed, climb rate, and devastating firepower. The mathematics favored the attackers overwhelmingly. Lead pilot Oberleutnant Klaus Meitner had already scored 14 kills during brutal combat over Tunisia and Sicily, making him a seasoned veteran accustomed to American formations that typically scattered when facing aggressive Luftwaffe tactics. His aircraft carried 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns compared to the P-40's 50-caliber weapons. German firepower concentrated in a platform designed specifically for air-to-air combat, not the ground attack missions that had shaped American fighter development. Hall's combat instincts kicked in the moment he recognized the threat. His P-40 rolled into a sharp dive, the nose dropping with practiced precision as he calculated the angle needed to cut off the German fighters before they could reach the bomber formation. Everything he'd learned during those grueling months at Tuskegee flooded through his hands and reflexes. The mathematical precision of deflection shooting, the geometry of interception, the timing required to stay in formation with his wingman, all of it had been drilled into him until it became pure instinct, faster than thought itself. The German pilot's speed advantage meant nothing once he committed to the attack run. He'd locked himself into a path, predictable and exploitable. Hall pushed the throttle forward, closing to 200 yards, well inside the lethal range of his 50-caliber machine guns. His finger tightened on the trigger. The aircraft bucked and shuddered as 6 streams of armor-piercing incendiary rounds tore through the sky. The rounds converged on the German fighter's engine like an invisible net, and the impact was immediate and catastrophic. The BMW radial engine absorbed hit after hit. Then it erupted. Fire poured from the wounded engine, spreading down the fuselage in an orange inferno that consumed the aircraft in seconds. The German pilot, Meitner, had perhaps 3 seconds to comprehend what was happening before his fighter tore itself apart in a brilliant explosion that scattered metal and debris across the Mediterranean sky. The second German pilot saw his leader vanish in that fireball. Instinct took over. He broke off and ran northward at maximum speed, abandoning the bombing run entirely. The radio erupted with excited American voices, pilots confirming the kill, their voices trembling with a mixture of disbelief and raw elation. 17 seconds. That's all it had taken from first contact to complete destruction. 17 seconds of flawless execution, each movement calculated, each decision precise. There could be no doubt anymore about what these pilots could do. At the base, ground crews huddled around the radio speakers, listening to mission reports trickling in. What they were hearing contradicted everything they'd been told about Negro pilots and their combat capabilities. The words being transmitted had weight, real and undeniable weight. They spoke of a victory, of a first, the first confirmed kill by a Tuskegee pilot against a real enemy. News traveled like wildfire through the Allied units scattered across North Africa. Pilots, mechanics, maintenance crews, intelligence officers, everyone whispered about what had happened up there in the Mediterranean sky. The 99th had done it. They'd beaten experienced Luftwaffe fighters through superior tactics and training, not through luck or numerical advantage. For the first time since the program began, institutional doubt collided with hard evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. But 3 weeks later, the harsh reality of modern warfare reasserted itself with devastating clarity. An escort mission over Sicily turned into a grinding encounter with a full German formation. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s in tight formations designed to support each other, while protecting individual vulnerabilities. The German leader, Hauptmann Hans Strello, carried 68 confirmed kills to his credit. He approached American formations with the confidence of a man who'd spent months shooting down inexperienced Allied pilots. The battle unfolded according to German doctrine. Strello's fighters dove from altitude where the sun blazed behind them, using superior climb rates and rigid tactical discipline to dictate how the fight would develop. Despite having 12 American P-40s against the German fighters, the 99th lost 2 aircraft without destroying anything in return. Worse, several bombers under their protection took damage from German fighters that slipped through gaps in their defensive screen, gaps created by the confusion and pressure of combat. The German Messerschmitts mounted devastating firepower, a single 30mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, plus 2 13mm machine guns, all concentrated in an airframe that could climb at over 3,200 feet per minute. The German pilots employed tactics refined through years of experience, with 2 plane pairs providing mutual support while maintaining the flexibility to respond to changing situations. They'd learned their trade in the skies over Russia and North Africa. The mission reports that came back made commanders uncomfortable, particularly those already convinced that Negro pilots couldn't perform in combat. Combat effectiveness below standards. Pilots showed hesitation in pressing attacks. Formation discipline deteriorated under pressure. The language confirmed what these officers believed they already knew, conveniently ignoring the complicated reality of how long it takes any pilot to develop genuine combat proficiency. But the numbers told a different story if anyone bothered to look closely. Fighter squadrons with white pilots operating in the same Mediterranean theater averaged 19 kills against 11 losses over similar periods, while maintaining bomber escort effectiveness that rarely exceeded what the 99th was actually achieving. Combat flying demanded experience that no training program could compress, regardless of a pilot's racial background or how much institutional support he received. The learning curve was steep for everyone, yet perception carried more weight than statistics in military hierarchies already committed to particular conclusions. Whisper campaigns began circulating through command channels, spreading doubts about whether the initial success had been real or just a fluke. Officers whose reputations depended on defending established doctrine found these whispers useful, and they passed them along eagerly. Colonel William Momire sat at his typewriter, keys striking with deliberate precision as he composed an evaluation that would shape the future of the entire Tuskegee experiment. September light streamed through the Venetian blinds of his Mediterranean headquarters, casting alternating bands of brightness and shadow across the pages spreading across his desk. These words would travel upward through military channels, reaching the highest levels of Allied command. Each sentence carried institutional weight that extended far beyond assessing individual pilots. This evaluation would make broader judgments about racial capability in modern warfare. Momire's language was clinical, detached, professional, but the conclusions aligned perfectly with what he'd already decided to believe. Performance ratings consistently fell below satisfactory levels, with particular emphasis on aggressive pursuit tactics and formation discipline under enemy pressure. The 99th Fighter Squadron lacks the killer instinct essential for air-to-air combat, he wrote. They demonstrate hesitation during critical engagement phases. German fighters escape or inflict unnecessary casualties on American bomber formations. The verdict was clear: these pilots weren't good enough. Momire ignored the statistical comparisons with other Mediterranean fighter squadrons. He focused instead on subjective observations that confirmed his existing biases about Negro combat effectiveness. The colonel had accumulated substantial combat experience himself, earning a Distinguished Flying Cross for personal courage under fire. But his evaluation methodology revealed something more troubling: institutional blindness that transformed minor performance variations into evidence of fundamental racial inadequacy. The recommendation was devastating in its bureaucratic finality: immediate reassignment to coastal patrol duties. The 99th would be removed from frontline combat operations. Coastal patrol meant routine reconnaissance flights over friendly territory, monitoring for enemy naval activity that posed minimal threat. The assignment would eliminate any possibility of air-to-air combat while providing face-saving justification for ending the Negro pilot experiment without explicitly acknowledging racial prejudice. Yet in the basement offices of Allied headquarters, military statisticians were compiling different data. September totals showed the 99th destroying 17 confirmed enemy aircraft against 8 losses. Comparable white fighter squadrons averaged 19 kills against 11 losses over identical timeframes. Escort effectiveness proved even more favorable. The 99th lost 3 bombers under their protection compared to theater averages of 4.2 losses per squadron. The performance differential fell well within normal combat variation, reflecting the inherent randomness of aerial warfare rather than systematic capability differences between racial groups. Individual pilot skill, weather conditions, enemy tactical decisions, mechanical reliability, all these factors created statistical noise that made meaningful comparisons difficult. Professional military analysts recognized these limitations, but their technical assessments carried far less institutional weight than field commander evaluations from officers whose reputations depended on defending established doctrine. Lieutenant Lee Archer received the Coastal Patrol assignment notification while cleaning his machine guns after returning from a successful bomber escort mission over southern Italy. The administrative language offered no explanation for the squadron's tactical demotion, only vague references to strategic requirements and operational necessities. Archer's hands knew his aircraft remained fully combat capable. His combat experience confirmed that his squadron's performance matched or exceeded any comparable unit in the Mediterranean. Yet here it was in writing, relegated to missions that first-year cadets could handle safely. Basic flying skills, routine radio procedures, nothing that would stretch their training or experience. The reassignment felt like punishment for succeeding at something they'd supposedly been incapable of achieving. October 12th changed everything. Intelligence reports indicated German fighter concentrations around the Anzio beachhead, where Allied forces struggled to expand their fragile foothold on Italian soil. Archer found himself leading 4 P-40s toward the battle zone, officially tasked with reconnaissance duties, but carrying full ammunition loads that suggested possibilities beyond simple observation. Radio chatter from ground controllers painted an increasingly desperate picture. German fighters were preparing coordinated attacks on American infantry positions. At 13:47 hours, Archer spotted them. 12 Messerschmitt Bf-109s and 8 Focke-Wulf 190s, diving in tight formation designed to maximize strafing effectiveness against ground targets. The tactical situation violated every principle of prudent engagement. 20 German fighters against 4 American P-40s, and their official orders prohibited initiating combat except in direct self-defense. Standard doctrine demanded radioing headquarters and requesting reinforcement before engaging superior enemy formations. But radio delays would allow the German attack to proceed unchallenged against American soldiers lacking adequate anti-aircraft defenses. Archer's calculation required no complex mathematics. Duty demanded engagement regardless of odds, official orders, or personal survival probabilities. Intervention might fail, but non-intervention guaranteed American casualties. His flight attacked from below and behind, using the sun's position to mask their approach until the final seconds. The battle lasted exactly 97 seconds from initial contact to final disengagement. In that brief time, American pilots destroyed 3 German fighters, scored 2 probable kills on aircraft trailing smoke, and completely disrupted the planned attack on ground forces. Lieutenant Wilson's P-40 sustained cannon damage, forcing him to bail out, though he returned to Allied lines 3 days later with valuable intelligence about German defensive positions. More significantly, German radio intercepts revealed growing respect for American Negro pilots among Luftwaffe squadrons. References to the Schwarze Vögel, the Black Birds, appeared frequently in tactical communications. German pilots reported that the red-tailed fighters flew with unexpected discipline and aggressive tactics worthy of serious consideration. Such professional recognition from experienced enemies carried weight that institutional prejudice couldn't match. The tactical success at Anzio created an uncomfortable situation for military hierarchy already committed to the 99th's combat inadequacy. Objective evidence contradicted official evaluations, forcing commanders to choose between acknowledging their assessment errors or finding alternative explanations that preserved institutional authority. The solution emerged through bureaucratic mechanisms that minimized the squadron's achievements while emphasizing broader strategic considerations. Mamaya's final assessment acknowledged the Anzio engagement while characterizing it as an exceptional circumstance that proved nothing about sustained combat effectiveness under normal operational conditions. Individual heroics couldn't substitute for consistent squadron-level performance, he argued. Isolated tactical successes only emphasized the overall pattern of inadequate aggressive instincts and formation discipline that defined Negro pilot limitations. The institutional machinery ground forward with mechanical inevitability, processing combat statistics through predetermined conclusions that transformed evidence into confirmation of existing beliefs rather than challenges to established doctrine. Then everything changed. The first North American P-51 Mustangs arrived at Ramitelli Airfield on a crisp March morning in 1944. Their polished aluminum fuselages gleamed against the muddy Italian landscape. Technological miracles descended from another era entirely. Ground crews gathered in silent appreciation around aircraft that represented a quantum leap beyond anything they'd previously maintained. Pilots examined cockpit layouts that promised capabilities their combat-worn P-40s could never match. Captain Benjamin Davis, Jr. ran his hands along the Mustang's laminar flow wing design, understanding intuitively that this aircraft would transform every tactical assumption that had governed fighter operations in the Mediterranean theater. That revolutionary wing design slashed drag by nearly a third compared to what conventional fighters could manage, while the bubble canopy wrapped around the cockpit gave pilots a complete 360-degree view that eliminated the frustrating blind spots that had haunted earlier generations of fighter aircraft. But the real game-changer sat in the engine bay. That Packard-built Merlin, with its 1,650 horsepower, delivered sustained speeds of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, numbers that seemed almost unreal when you considered where air combat stood just months before. The fuel setup was brilliant too, with 269 gallons internally plus 275-gallon drop tanks. The P-51 could stretch out 1,650 miles, far enough to shepherd the heavy bombers deep into German territory and come back home with fuel still in the tanks for dogfighting if needed. That service ceiling of 41,900 feet put these fighters above most German interceptors, and a climb rate of 3,200 feet per minute matched performance characteristics that enemy pilots had previously enjoyed. Davis made a straightforward decision about his squadron's paint scheme, ordering those distinctive red tails that would become famous across the entire European campaign. It wasn't about symbolism. It came down to practical identification during the chaos of bomber escort operations. That bright red paint stopped friendly fire incidents cold during scrambled escort missions. Plus, it carried psychological weight for both Allied crews and German pilots who learned quickly that those crimson markings meant they faced exceptional pilots. What started as a tactical solution evolved into a signature that announced the arrival of America's best bomber escort unit. By March 1944, these Tuskegee pilots had logged over 200 combat hours each, transforming classroom lessons into genuine expertise forged in real combat against determined opponents. They'd picked up knowledge about formation flying, tactical communication, and energy management through rough encounters with experienced Luftwaffe pilots who didn't tolerate inexperience. The survivors represented serious combat knowledge that made them formidable in the air, despite continued skepticism about their fundamental qualifications. The bombing campaign against German factories had ramped up throughout early 1944, with Allied commanders pushing for deeper penetration missions that sent bomber formations far beyond what they'd previously attempted. Those missions demanded escorts capable of reaching Berlin, Munich, and other heavily defended industrial targets where German fighter formations reached their maximum density. On March 24th, Captain Lee Buddy Archer led 16 red-tailed P-51s toward Berlin alongside 72 B-17 flying fortresses, carrying 720 tons of explosives bound for German aircraft plants. The mission meant 8 hours aloft, 1,600 miles round trip, operating at maximum altitude near 28,000 feet, where German defenses stationed their most seasoned pilots and most advanced aircraft. Around 14:30 hours, roughly 50 miles southwest of Berlin, German fighters appeared in waves that dwarfed what Allied intelligence had predicted. The Luftwaffe threw over 60 aircraft at the bombers, including standard Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Fokker-Wulfs, plus the revolutionary Messerschmitt M262 jet fighters that could hit 540 miles per hour with their twin Jumo 004 turbojets, each producing 1,180 pounds of thrust. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown spotted those jets first, silver streaks cutting toward the bomber formation at speeds that made conventional interception tactics worthless. The German jets screamed in above 500 miles per hour, but their wide turning radius made them predictable despite that speed advantage. Brown had studied the intelligence reports on jet tactics, knew that the Me-262 was blindingly fast but couldn't maneuver like a conventional fighter, especially vulnerable during their attack passes when they committed to straight-line runs. Brown positioned his flight directly between those approaching jets and the bomber formation, then executed a head-on attack that exploited the one weakness Me-262 pilots absolutely couldn't overcome. With both aircraft closing at nearly 1,000 miles per hour combined, he had maybe 1 second to line up his gun sight and squeeze the trigger before they flashed past each other. 6 streams of 50 caliber rounds converged on the lead jet's engine intakes, causing catastrophic damage that turned that revolutionary fighter into tumbling wreckage. The aerial battle that followed showed how American fighter tactics had evolved from defensive formations protecting bombers into aggressive hunting techniques designed to find and destroy German interceptors before they could get near the Allied formations. Those red-tailed Mustangs used superior high-altitude performance to grab positioning advantages, while keeping disciplined formations that created overlapping fields of fire around the bomber streams. German pilots trained to expect American escorts that abandoned their charges found themselves facing opponents who refused to be lured away from their protective duties. The Tuskegee pilots had developed escort tactics emphasizing bomber survival over personal kill credits, using P-51 performance to establish protective parameters that made penetrating those formations extremely costly for German fighters. The mission results shattered every previous escort effectiveness record in the European theater. The red-tailed fighters destroyed 8 German aircraft, including 3 Me-262s, while losing only 2 P-51s of their own. Critically, all 72 bombers returned safely without a single loss to enemy fighters, an achievement that hadn't happened before and proved the superiority of disciplined escort tactics over individualistic fighter operations. German radio intercepts captured the psychological impact of repeated defeats against those red-tailed fighters, with experienced Luftwaffe pilots reporting that the red-tails were everywhere. German military assessments grudgingly acknowledged that these American fighters operated with veteran-level discipline from their earliest missions, something remarkably unusual for Allied replacement pilots who normally needed extensive combat experience before developing that kind of tactical maturity. That Berlin mission shifted the entire tactical balance of the European air war. The Luftwaffe, once confident it could inflict catastrophic casualties on Allied bombing formations, now faced escorts combining superior aircraft performance with tactical discipline that made successful interception almost impossible. The psychological advantage had swung decisively to the Americans, with German pilots increasingly reluctant to press attacks against bomber formations guarded by red-tailed Mustangs. More importantly, the mission showed that the Tuskegee Airmen had moved beyond simply proving their competence into establishing themselves as among the most effective fighter units in the entire European theater, achieving tactical superiority through professional excellence that rendered institutional prejudice irrelevant to operational reality. General Henry Hap Arnold held the classified assessment bearing his personal seal, documents containing statistics that would reshape American military aviation policy, though the numbers told only part of a story that had fundamentally transformed institutional beliefs about human capability in combat. By April 15, 1945, Arnold reviewed the official assessment of the 332nd Fighter Group's combat record, and every statistic represented missions flown by pilots once declared unfit for aerial combat by institutions now forced to acknowledge their extraordinary accomplishments. 15,533 combat sorties completed without a single mission abort due to pilot error or maintenance problems. 112 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed through air-to-air combat, with 47 additional probables that German records later verified as actual victories. 950 ground targets eliminated, locomotives, motor vehicles, parked aircraft, representing millions of dollars in German military equipment removed from service through precision attacks, demonstrating tactical competence at the highest levels. The bomber escort statistics demolished every preconception about Negro pilot capabilities under combat stress. 25 heavy bombers lost, while protected by red-tailed fighters across 179 separate deep penetration missions, compared to theater averages of 46 bomber losses per fighter group over equivalent operational periods. That difference represented hundreds of Allied airmen who made it home because their escorts refused to abandon protective formations. Arnold's staff had compiled comparative analyses, placing the 332nd's performance in proper military context, revealing achievements surpassing most white fighter units operating under identical tactical conditions. Average engagement altitude of 26,000 feet exploited the Mustang's superior high-altitude capabilities while forcing German interceptors to operate at disadvantageous altitudes where their aircraft performed poorly. Formation discipline maintained under combat pressure exceeded standards established by veteran squadrons with years of operational experience. The statistical record included awards and decorations reflecting both individual heroism and unit-level excellence. 96 distinguished flying crosses, 14 silver stars, and 8 purple hearts represented official recognition of combat performance that couldn't be dismissed as statistical coincidence or bureaucratic error. Each decoration required detailed documentation and command endorsement, creating an official record of achievement contradicting institutional prejudices embedded in military doctrine since 1925. Combat aircraft losses told a more complicated story, revealing the true cost of aerial warfare regardless of pilot background. 66 P-40 Warhawks and P-51 Mustangs destroyed by enemy action, mechanical failure, or operational accidents over 3 years of intensive combat. Each loss meant not merely data points, but individual tragedies involving pilots whose families received telegrams expressing official condolences for their sacrifice. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown's destruction of that Messerschmitt in 1962 had become legendary throughout Allied air forces, representing one of only 5 confirmed kills of those revolutionary aircraft by Allied pilots during the entire European campaign. The tactical achievement required split-second timing and exceptional marksmanship against a target moving above 500 miles per hour, demonstrating reflexes and decision-making supposedly absent within the Negro population according to official military doctrine. Captain Lee Buddy Archer, with 4 confirmed victories and informal recognition as the Tuskegee Airmen's leading ace, provided additional evidence that individual excellence transcended racial boundaries when properly trained and equipped. Archer's aggressive tactics and tactical innovations influenced squadron-level combat procedures, transforming defensive escort duties into offensive operations that sought out and destroyed German fighters before they could threaten bomber formations. German military archives captured after the Reich's collapse contained tactical assessments offering enemy perspectives on red-tailed fighter effectiveness. General Major Adolf Galland, former general of fighters for the Luftwaffe, specifically noted the exceptional discipline demonstrated by American Negro pilots in combat reports reaching the highest levels of German command. Unlike other Allied fighter units that could be drawn away from bomber formations through tactical deception, those red-tailed fighters maintained protective responsibilities that made successful interception extremely difficult. Hauptmann Klaus Neumann, a German ace with 78 confirmed kills, reported to Luftwaffe headquarters that those red-tailed fighters flew like veterans from their first missions. Something extraordinarily unusual for American replacement pilots who typically required extensive combat experience before achieving tactical competence. German tactical intelligence had identified specific red-tailed squadrons as high-priority threats deserving concentrated attack efforts. Official recognition of combat effectiveness transcending racial prejudices embedded in American military doctrine. The psychological impact on German pilots became evident through radio intercepts and prisoner interrogations, revealing growing reluctance to engage bomber formations protected by red-tailed escorts. References to those blackbirds are dangerous appeared frequently in Luftwaffe communications, with experienced German pilots acknowledging that encounters with red-tailed fighters often resulted in German casualties without corresponding damage to Allied formations. May 8, 1945, brought victory in Europe Day and unconditional German surrender of forces that had once seemed unstoppable. The 332nd Fighter Group participated in final combat operations until the last day of hostilities, maintaining operational readiness and tactical excellence characterizing their entire European service. Those red-tailed Mustangs joined victory formations over major European cities, visible symbols of American military might, including pilots once declared unfit for combat duty. The irony proved complete and unavoidable. Pilots declared mentally inferior and physically cowardly in 1925 had compiled one of the most distinguished combat records in United States military history, achieving tactical superiority over German pilots representing the Reich's most experienced aviation personnel. They hadn't merely proven institutional racism wrong, They had demonstrated that prejudice had systematically wasted extraordinary talent for decades while weakening American military capabilities through artificial barriers serving no legitimate military purpose. Post-war analysis revealed the broader implications of the Tuskegee Airmen's achievements for American military doctrine and national policy. President Harry Truman's decision to integrate the armed forces through Executive Order 9981 in 1948 cited their distinguished service as essential evidence that segregated military units were both morally wrong and tactically inefficient. The combat record provided irrefutable proof that excellence in military service depended on training, equipment, and leadership, rather than racial characteristics bearing no relevance to operational effectiveness. The final statistical summary occupied less than 2 pages in Arnold's classified assessment, yet the numbers represented a transformation extending far beyond individual pilot accomplishments. 996 pilots graduated from the Tuskegee program between 1941 and 1946, with 352 serving in overseas combat roles. They had proven that institutional wisdom often masked institutional blindness, that the same prejudices declaring Negro pilots unqualified had been systematically discarding human potential that could have strengthened American military capabilities from the beginning. The red-tailed legacy extended beyond World War II into the post-war struggle for civil rights and social justice, with Tuskegee veterans using their military credentials to challenge segregation in civilian society, while pursuing military careers, eventually reaching the highest ranks of the integrated Air Force.